Good morning, gentlemen. Good to see you here with us in the studio. Yep, you're hearing me, which is wonderful. And I tell you what, we'll check we can hear you too by doing some introductions, shall we? A bit better than our slide there. Why don't you do it yourself? John, let me come to you first. Top right, I can see you there. Tell us about yourself and Sesame as an organization.
Yeah, greetings. It's a pleasure to be with you all. My name is John Dyke. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of SESME, the Smart Manufacturing Institute. We're a consortia funded by the federal government to drive productivity and U.S. manufacturing competitiveness. And we do so by spending about $140 million over the course of a 5-year period to invest in the technologies, the workforce education, upskilling components, and convening an ecosystem to accelerate the adoption of smart manufacturing here in the US. And so it's been a privilege to lead this organization for almost 5 years. I come from kind of the manufacturing automation and information system with responsibilities at GE and Rockwell Automation for their manufacturing software portfolios. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today.
No, it's our pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you with us here on the panel. All that experience, really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on some of these topics. Let's come down to you, Ashok, below John in the grid there. Same question, really, just an introduction. Tell us a bit about yourself and your passion, I suppose, when it comes to being or talking about supply chain.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yeah, we're hearing you loud and clear.
Perfect. Hey, morning, everyone. Ashok. I lead supply chain analytics at Best Buy, which is a retailer. I also fulfill my passion for supply chain by teaching a course on supply chain digital transformation at Rutgers University here in New Jersey. And Best Buy supply chain is the heart of what we do and fulfilling the promise of connecting people with technology. And digital transformation is a big part of that journey.
Yeah.
And I'm here would love to talk about the role that I play in, which is as a purveyor of data in that journey. Excited to be here and go forward in the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ashok. And finally, Hans, how about yourself? Tell us what we should know about you and the dairy farmers of America.
Good morning, everyone. Very excited to be on this panel this morning. My name is Hans Berghorst. I'm the VP of Manufacturing Assets and Technology at Dairy Farmers of America. Dairy Farmers of America is a dairy cooperative. We are owned by 6,600 farming families across the US. We are the largest producer and processor of milk in the world. We produce over 60 billion pounds of milk every year. That's 4,000 truckloads per day, or 1.5 million per year. This milk is processed in one of our 86 processing plants across the US, or directly supplied to business customer that use it as an ingredient, and our product finds its way in the US, but also to global markets.
Fantastic. And I'll be asking you about that very shortly, in fact. But all three of you, thank you very much for the introduction. I think we're well acquainted now for our folks at home who are watching along. But John, let me come to you first to sort of set the scene, really. Manufacturing productivity has had a difficult couple of years, or turbulent few years, it's probably fair to say. The stats are there, plain to see. Productivity in the US has plateaued and more recently declined over the past decade or so. Tell us, how can digital transformation play a role in reversing that trend?
Yeah, thanks. I think that happens to be one of the most important conversations that we need to be having here in this country. If we look at the data from the Federal Reserve, which tracks manufacturing productivity in a bunch of dimensions. In my view, one of the most important is by worker output. And so that particular stat, if you download the data from the FRED, as they call it, shows that for the bulk of the third industrial revolution, we saw a significant, consistent linear growth in US manufacturing productivity. And somewhere around 2010, that began plateauing and then declining in the last 5 years. And so understanding why that happens to be the case and then addressing those challenges, I think, is vital. I think there's a major sort of perspective that manufacturing reshoring is taking place, and I believe we're beginning to see that. There's certainly supply chain regionalization that's taking place as manufacturers and companies, particularly in this side of the Atlantic, are trying to rethink supply chains and restructure their supply chains. But doing so in an environment where manufacturing productivity is declining is not does not bode well for those types of strategic initiatives. And so, like I said, understanding why that's the case and then addressing that is key. And so I think from my perspective, there's a bit of an irony here. We began talking about the fourth industrial revolution right when this productivity decline was taking place or starting, and sort of the $3.8 trillion of value creation promised by Industry 4.0 really hasn't materialized. And so as we've done the analysis here at the Smart Manufacturing Institute to look at why in the US manufacturing productivity has fallen, why smart manufacturing has not been adopted at the same rate as it has been in Europe and in Asia, even though they would say that it's not seeing the adoption rate that they would hope for and anticipate. We believe that there are some really important realities that we have to proclaim and then work through. We think that Industry 4.0 has broadly been, so far, a decade in, taking Industry 3.0 ideas and concepts and kind of rebranding them, repositioning them as Industry 4.0. And while that sounds a little bit provocative or harsh, that is the reality. And the manufacturers that we work with here sort of underscore that. And so I think the work that we're doing to create a more collaborative environment here to address the technology constraints, the cost and complexity in particular, the cost and complexity of using manufacturing operations data to drive plant, enterprise, and supply chain optimization has got to happen on a way simpler and lower cost scale. And so those are the efforts that we're trying to invest in, and we believe that will reverse this trajectory of productivity losses here in the US.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let me come across Ashok, and just build on some of the things. You know, John was setting the scene in many ways there for us, for those that are here today. But from a logistics side, there does seem to be a bit of a laggard, really, when it comes to digitization. Give us your thoughts, on that. We've seen in the past 3 years how some things have accelerated, but clearly supply chains still have quite a way to go, don't they?
Absolutely. And when we look at overall digitization across various domains, supply chain is quite a laggard in what is called digital fitness. Due to which there are, the opportunities that is afforded by digitization technologies hasn't quite been realized. However, I would say certain areas of supply chain, I would say about final mile planning, demand forecasting, and some areas of just planning have been at the forefront, are way ahead of some of the other areas of supply chain, primarily because the underlying infrastructure and the data exists. Thanks to the accelerated innovation in the last few years and the presence of a lot of what I would call disruptive innovation, the pace of change and pace of improvement is faster than ever before. But the only way is up for the logistics side of supply chain, and a lot of progress, be it on the technology side or where I'm passionate about, which is on data and analytics.
Absolutely. Hans, let me bring you in here, if I may. We've just been hearing about manufacturing productivity sort of plateauing, declining, and that trend. Give us an indication about, milk production is, quite clearly continuing to grow. But what about consumption in the US? And what impact have those consumption levels had on the dairy farmers of America and the sort of markets you're serving principally?
When you look at global milk, there are basically 3 milk pools in the world. And it's New Zealand, Australia, That's Europe and that is the US, where the milk pools in Europe and New Zealand, Australia are not growing anymore due to environmental limitations. We have a big opportunity in the US to continue to grow. But at the same time, consumption is stagnant, is stabilizing in the US. So the gap between supply and demand becomes bigger and bigger. And that means that a bigger part of the US milk has to go to global markets. It's difficult because we are not used to that. Most of the milk was sold internally in the US in a very limited product portfolio. So in dairy, US has to become globally competitive by extending product portfolios, increasing quality, increasing efficiencies, because we have to compete with large dairy processors also in Europe and New Zealand that were used to bring their product to global markets.
And let me
So
come back.
there's a lot of challenge also then in digitization of our what we call grass to glass supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me come back to you actually with a follow-up question, and then we'll widen this out to our other panelists here today. But just put automation into the discussion for us. You know, how the dairy farmers, how are you automating certain processes with regards to production and delivery, and what impact is that having on the workforce?
Yeah, okay. Let me give an example. I shared already that we are collecting 4,000 trucks of milk per day.
Wow.
Until recently, a driver would go to a farm, collect the milk, and has to, on a piece of paper, note the address, the farm, the location, the volume, temperature of the milk. He will collect over the week those papers and go once or twice a week to the office to hand over that paper documentation. We've implemented a cloud application, so each and every driver has an app on his phone or on an iPad that collects that information and becomes real-time available for us. So that's a huge difference. Our administration load has become much smaller. We have the data real-time available, and it brings us huge benefits.
Yeah, those insights, real-time data collection, no doubt, is invaluable. Ashok, perhaps this is where I should bring you in to get a sense of this. It's widely believed it's people and culture that hold the key to digital transformation, but talk to us from a data analytics perspective and just why that is so integral to underpinning initiatives like this.
Absolutely. With technology, data and analytics has become one of the fulcrums of digital transformation. While people have used technology for a while, but the supply chain workforce of today is still warming up to how to leverage data to take decisions. And the key to success is building that trust. And that trust, especially when the recommendation from analytics is contrary to their gut. Now, I'm not suggesting here for analytics to replace human judgment, but building a good, healthy balance between the two, which is experiential gut and the recommendations. There are a couple of ways organizations can go about making this happen. One is to what I would call map out the operational processes end to end, not just the happy path, but also the exception management, because that helps the analytics team connect the data to the processes and provide what I would call the product journey. All of us know about the customer journey and its role in customer experience. Similarly, a product journey would be invaluable in mapping out the supply chain journey. Another area could be also incentivizing, let's call it data governance at source. What I mean is we all know data is messy, no news to everybody here. However, every organization has an army of data engineers who work between when the data gets transferred from the operational system to our data warehouses. They work on cleansing it, but that's not perfect. So if we put in the right processes to collect let's call it complete and quality data that would aid the data and analytics team to really drive change and provide that valuable insights and get closer to the supply chain and in collaborating and making, let's call it, optimal decisions.
Absolutely. John, let me come back to you for your take on this, really. And give us, obviously you work with, manufacturers of different sizes across the US. In those conversations, when you're talking to them and finding out about their problems with regards, let's talk about data and analytics here. Why do so many struggle? I think our speaker on day one put it data rich, but insight poor. And that seems to be, a fairly commonplace situation. Why is that? And how do we address it and overcome it?
Yeah, that's another great question. I had the privilege of speaking to a congressionally convened group yesterday who's working on a national plan for smart manufacturing, and they asked the same question. And I think the answer is nuanced, but I think again there's a huge distinction between the Fortune 1000 and the rest of manufacturing. We've done our analysis. The Fortune 1000 make up roughly 2% of U.S. manufacturers, and the other 98 are non-Fortune 1000 manufacturers. And as Ashok was saying, that every organization has large groups that can do the data cleansing and look at the analytics. That made me smile because that's sort of the Fortune 1000 realm, and then there's the rest. And there's a massive digital divide between these types of organizations. But I would say this, even the Fortune 1000, many of whom we work with here, from the P&Gs, the Exxon Mobils, to the Johnson & Johnsons, the Pfizers, and General Mills, and Toyota, Ford, GM, Stellantis, the great manufacturing companies have the same struggles, but on a different scale. And here's what it all comes down to. 40 years of sort of graduated, growing investment in software-based systems to understand productivity and address constraints, understand where your challenges are on the shop floor, and ensure quality, safety, delivery, cost, productivity initiatives, et cetera. 40 years of what I call innovation purgatory, which is not pilot purgatory, but it sort of comes to the same place. Unbridled innovation, where every use case comes along, a plant and enterprises, we're going to solve this problem. They build a stack, a data silo, a stovepipe architecture. The next use case comes along, they build another stack. The previous speaker on this at this summit was speaking about scope 1, 2, 3, 4 carbon reporting and some of the challenges there. That's another use case, right? The connected worker, another use case. Productivity, another use case. Every single time. So these manufacturers are left with massively complex and costly to sustain systems that sustain their manufacturing operations. We have to look at a future, and this is what we're focused on, to reduce the cost and complexity, which equals getting away from that use case mentality where we create infrastructure every time for every use case, for every solution, for every problem that we need to solve. And so I think it's not compelling, it's not sexy, the idea that we're talking about infrastructure, but it's interoperability of applications and of data from operations that'll enable use case interoperability and use case proliferation and innovation proliferation on a scale that we haven't seen before. That's, we believe, how we reduce cost and complexity for the big manufacturers, which is going to dramatically reduce the barrier of entry for small and medium manufacturers. And that's how we move them across the digital divide.
Yeah, absolutely. Ashok, do you want to jump in?
Can I step in for a minute? Great point on the digital divide, John. And I also want to connect another point you mentioned about not going use case wise and almost looking at it enterprise wide. Almost every supply chain now follows metrics. But another concept that is very prevalent now is to what you can call determine metrics that matter, and importantly, connect that to the enterprise goals. Because now at every level of our supply chain, there is performance measures, but does that align to the overall enterprise goals that is set out by the leadership? And the way to bring all that together is to connect them into a multi-level hierarchical set of metrics for which there are frameworks that exist, and that should help ensure that everyone is rowing in the same direction. Not saying people are rowing in opposite directions, but sometimes it goes tangential. But that hierarchical set of metrics, so that a load planner or a warehouse worker knows how their role is contributing to the enterprise goals that have been set.
Yeah, fantastic. Great advice, great insights as well. Thank you, Ashok. Panelists, we have an audience member who would like to ask a question now. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome Ashish from Western Digital up onto the stage to join me.
Hi,
good morning.
Are you able to?
We've got you sideways.
Good morning, good evening.
Good morning, good evening. I'm not sure if you're able to flip whatever device you're on. Oh, now you're upside down. Other way. We might have better. There we go. One more.
How about now?
Try what? There we go. Spot on. Yeah, there we are. We got there. Floor's yours.
Thank you very much. And this is a great conversation about the supply chain. I'm from Western Digital, looking at the supply chain transformation across the organization. The point which I wanted to bring it to the stage is about autonomous supply chain. And I think all of you are actually just referring in terms of the metrics, in terms of the innovation. I would like to take some of your inputs. When you think about the autonomous supply chain, thinking from all the way from the customers all the way to the suppliers, which is outside of the four walls, and then within the four walls, how we normally do with respect to the forecast, the variety of different forecasts, the demand planning, supply planning, bill planning, how you guys have been thinking through from autonomous supply chain, or to the extent of lights out planning. So in that case, you would be looking at more from exception, planning by the exception, rather than having a fleet of the resources continuously keep on looking and then working on those changes as they needed in order to support the forecast or to support the fluctuation in the market.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, great question. Actually, that came up in our briefing yesterday as well. Here's a bit of an anecdote. So when the pandemic sort of reared its ugly face back in the early spring of 2020, we got together with a handful of our great manufacturing partners, including Johnson & Johnson, General Mills, Procter & Gamble, Raytheon, Honeywell, and ConAgra, just to kind of focus on what we believe we could do from a smart manufacturing, digital transformation perspective to help the nation in times of massive disruption. And we determined a couple of things. Number one, our response, the manufacturers, and I don't point out just these six, but we determined that this was broadly the case for most manufacturers, if not all. Manufacturers, despite millions and millions of dollars of investment in supply chain technologies, were left stunned and really unable to leverage those technologies. It came down to people and insights, subject matter experts, Excel and paper to address this kind of massive disruption. As we then look forward to what the path forward needed to be, we determined that we can't create a strategy for a massive scale disruption like that. We have to create strategies that are going to help in that sort of edge the bell curve scenario, but also help in the day-to-day disruptions that supply chains need in the sorts of scenarios that you're referring to. And so what we agreed on is that there has to be, and this is what we're beginning to work on, have begun to work on, a standards-based systematic way for manufacturers and their suppliers to exchange data in real time. The shocking reality is that the suppliers for most large manufacturers happen to be small, medium manufacturers, and they're not really capable of sustaining the big, sophisticated data infrastructure for the kinds of technologies that the large manufacturers want to see them use to deploy data that's going to give real-time advance notice of potential disruptions in their organizations. And so the notion of standardized, we're not talking standards, but a standardized approach to de facto standard approach to low cost, low complexity tools that enable a supplier to fulfill an information model request, a data request from the manufacturer is a major need and a major step forward that's going to enable all kinds of transformation to help in these types of massive scale disruptions, but also responding in a much more effective way, real-time way to kind of day-to-day disruptions in the supply chain as well. And that's, we believe, how we get to the next level of productivity, the next level of capabilities when it comes to supply chains and manufacturing.
Yeah, some great insights, John. Thank you. Ashish, thank you so much for coming up and taking part in the conversation. Has that answered your question?
Yeah, it did. And thank you, John. The digital transformation infrastructure, it is one of the most important things in terms of looking at the lights out planning. And you summarized that really well. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ashish. Yeah, thumbs up from John. Well, we've got a flurry of questions coming in now, so we'll move on to this next one. And this is a question that I'm going to ask on behalf of Srini, who is in the audience, which I should say we are welcome to do. If you wish for me to ask a question on your behalf, just seed it in the chat for us and we can do that. But Srini, this is directed towards Ashok, but perhaps Hans, if you've got any thoughts as well, welcome to pitch in. In your experience, what are the top 3 things, if you can distill it down to that for us, that organizations could or should be doing to foster a culture for digital transformation?
Couple of areas. One, focus on what I would call digitization and digitalization, right? The basics of digital transformation is taking communication in a digital manner away from being analog. And that should happen not just enterprise-wide, but across the value chain, which to an earlier discussion is much easier within your enterprise. But if your partners aren't in the journey, in the digitization journey, it is going to be much harder. That's one. But 2, focus on, one of my passions is focus on how do we go about making data-driven decisions, how to infuse that into the overall culture of the organization. It's a very delicate journey, but a very important journey. And finally, it's a cliche now, is focus on people and the change management with respect to people. And just like the steps I laid out for a digital transformation or the culture change with people for data, I know there exist similar ones for technology, process, so on and so forth. So those 3 would be my main focus areas for organizations embarking on a digital transformation journey or ones that are already on it and are evolving in that journey.
Fantastic. Ashok, well done. Thank you for tackling that on the spot. We do have an audience member up next, but Hans, very quickly, allow me just to invite you to jump in. We're after sort of 3 things an organization can do. Ashok provided that, but anything else from a culture perspective before we move on to our next question from our audience member? Anything you would highlight or what's worked well perhaps at the Dairy Farmers organization?
What we saw, but what you see in all, let's say, processes and management of change. And it's really important. Why is that? Because you have other ways of working. People tend to do things for years and years and suddenly have to change. And if you don't have their buy-in for that change process and an other way of working, you will fail. Or you will not capture all the benefits that are possible. I very much agree with Ashok on data-driven decisions. For us, it was not only efficiency gain to digitize, but also you unlock a lot of additional value when you use the data in the right way. Better collaboration with your suppliers and your customers. The example is now we have all the data of all those milk supplies real-time available. We can unlock value in sending milk there where it has the highest value. And when you send milk of a certain protein content to a bottling plant, the protein has a different value than when you send it to a cheese plant, for instance. And making that kind of decisions, that was not possible in the past, but you unlock that value by having the data available.
Yeah, absolutely fundamental, isn't it? I think that's abundantly clear already. Well, look, I said we had another audience member, so let's dive straight into it. Brian from Kroger, who's going to join us now here in the studio. Hi, Brian. How
you doing?
I'm very well indeed. How are you?
Great panel discussion. A couple of you guys, I feel like I want to reach out to directly because I got some questions and thoughts. So.
Well, you're welcome to do that, of course, at your own leisure. But for the purposes of today and our panel here and now, what is your question and who's it directed to, or if it's everyone?
It's more just kind of an observation that it goes to culture, but it's getting the mindset of changing it. Everything has been very much project driven at many companies that I've worked in. And part of as we go forward, we need to think about working on flexible capabilities, on reusable platforms. And that's not the way companies think. That's not the way leaders think a lot of times. And as a data guy coming out of IT and development myself, you're not always going to know what things are going to enable. And when you're on very fixed IRRs and ROI kind of things, there's not always a calculation for innovation and what will be enabled by taking a chance, taking a risk. Yeah. And we need to be a little more flexible on that way of thinking. But how do you guys build? I guess my question, if I have to phrase it in form of a question, have you guys had success in getting getting the C-suite to start thinking about that in that way, as opposed to the way they've thought their entire careers?
Yeah. John, do you want to kick us off? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I would love to. That's a phenomenal question. In fact, we about a year ago, in working with our members here, that was raised as the number one challenge for accelerating the adoption of smart manufacturing. So we began an effort that we just kicked off at the end of 2022, which was to reach into our membership and ask 25 manufacturing executives. We specifically handpicked them with OT and IT experience and with business and technology experience to advocate for exactly what you're talking about, to think about innovation and to think about future strategies to enable smart manufacturing across the plant, the enterprise, and the supply chain in a way that's puts us on a better trajectory in a place where we're not thinking about point solutions every single time for every single use case, as I mentioned before. And the biggest concern that each one of these executives has is that there isn't that sort of mature understanding and the maturity of the entire sort of set of stakeholders that are vital to these types of ideas and investing in a way that's going to facilitate future requirements in a much more effective and really scalable way. So we had our inaugural call with this Smart Manufacturing Executive Council about 3 weeks ago, and the very first thing they agreed on was to create, I'll call it a manifesto. It's going to be called the Smart Manufacturing Principles. Smart Manufacturing Guiding Principles document. Manifesto sounded a little too negative in today's environment. So we identified 8 roles, starting with corporate and supply chain leadership, plant leadership. We went to technology providers, the consulting community, implementers, educators, and then we added, there were 7, then we added an 8th, which is the frontline worker, the operator. And our goal is to provide guidance and recommendations, strategies, and behaviors by role for each of those 8 stakeholders in this journey to help them understand and think more holistically and not demand the same sort of, as you pointed out, return on investment, IRR sort of structure for the infrastructure that's going to get them to a better place over the longer term. So So I'm excited. It's going to take several months before we actually bring that to the marketplace, but I'm excited about the prospect of changing the landscape and changing the horizon at which plans for innovation like that can happen on a grand scale.
Mm-hmm. Looking forward to it. I'm assuming that paper will be made available to the general public.
That is correct.
Okay, I'll be watching your LinkedIn feed for it.
As I will too be. Thank you very much, Brian, for coming up, and great response again. John, thank you very much. Brian, thank you. I'll allow you to return to our audience. And other things that we can make public are the results to our poll, which we ran at the start of this session. You may well remember we asked you about emerging technologies and perhaps where you see that having the greatest impact. We'll take a look at the results and then we'll get some reflections before we finish our session here in the panel. So let's take a look. In which of those areas of the business do you see emerging technologies having the greatest impact? And quite clearly, let me get my words out, quite clearly, we have a majority, 64% of you, automating processes is indicating that response. 23% of you said consolidating data, 9% improving customer experience, CX, and 5% improving employee experiences. Well, a clear majority of you indicating where you see emerging technology having that greatest impact. Very much aligned with the conversation we've had here today, which is pleasing to see. We can take those results down, and perhaps, Ashok, let me come to you, really just to reflect on what we're seeing there. I mean, that's not really a surprise, is it? But in context of digital transformation and what we've been talking about today, people, processes, technology, which of those is the single biggest barrier, do you think, in your opinion?
Clearly, and I'm sure everybody in the audience would also agree, the key to success and the biggest barrier to success in the journey is the culture and people. Mm-hmm. But I see that also as an opportunity, because I wanted to step in on provide a slightly different perspective from what John mentioned on the leadership buy-in for digital transformation. Mm-hmm. And then that aligns to with this poll too, in that in the organizations I've worked for, I found leaders to want it, to be fully on board with the concept of digital transformation. Leaders knew what they want, now, but the how is the challenge, right? Yeah. And when I look at this poll on tools, I feel that automation is, in a way, the path of least resistance, right? A journey and an end that all of us would agree we can see, compared to the other areas. So not surprising. And I see that as even more prevalent across the organizations I worked for and the organizations I see otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I fully agree with Ashok. It is, let's say, the guys that are really feeling the change in their work, you need to get them on board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said, Hans, Ashok. John, that's all the time that we have in our panel session. I don't even know where half of that went, but thank you for being here today. No doubt you're going to get a few ads on LinkedIn from members of our audience today, which is a good sign, I think, but a good session nonetheless. So thank you for your time, your thoughts. It's been great to share the stage with you. We'll say goodbye.